Hey friends, it's RSKT, and in today's video I want to break down some of the Ableton devices that I included in my most recent free sample pack. A lot of people seem to be really enjoying the sample pack lately, and yeah, as I said, I included 3 devices: the RSKT drum box, bass box, and synth box. So yeah, today's video is basically going to be a tutorial showing you how to build device racks like these of your own so that you can pretty much make them any way that you want. You can use samples, you can use instruments. The world is your oyster. Ableton device racks are just super powerful. These ones were specifically inspired by the usage of a Groovebox. So I've actually seen like a few other YouTubers tackle this similar concept in a very similar way. I myself find that I make music really quickly on the Synthstrom Deluge, which is a Groovebox that has a strikingly similar workflow to Ableton. I'm always able to make music super quickly on that. And whenever I jump into Ableton, it's definitely less so. I think that's because there's just so many more options and so many more ways that you can do things. Browsing for samples and whatnot can definitely take longer. And sometimes you just got an idea in your head where you want to be able to open up like a Groovebox template, for example, have all of this stuff loaded in. You can flesh out the entire song in session view without even thinking about sound design or anything like that. And then you can kind of work backwards and start worrying about all of that other stuff later once you've got the arrangement down. So we're not only going to be looking at like how to build devices like these, but some other things to consider when you're doing them, because you can do some pretty remarkable stuff. Just to give you a super quick overview right now, I've got a clang sample in here whenever I hit this pad, and I'm using an Ableton push to control it. So at the front, we've got some effects. Right, nothing too crazy, just some basic effects. And over to the right here, we actually have a sample selector. We can up the release time of this. Transpose it, pan it, yeah, full ADSR, and then a very basic EQ at the end. And that goes for all of these samples in here, all of these drum pads. So if we select the snare, for example, it's just really fast. Essentially, like, again, I'm using a push 2. I can lay down a really quick and basic drum beat. Right, I'm not happy with the sound of that snare, so I can just come in here and select a different one. If I think the release is too long, I can drop the sustain and play with the decay. Could transpose it up a bit. Maybe play around with the kick. I like that one, but if I think it's got too much low end, I can just drop it a little bit. And then come in and start playing around with some effects to control the sound of the entire kit. And of course, the beauty of this is that, you know, you can drop in LFOs and MIDI expression controls and whatnot to twist all of these knobs for you and get really chaotic and awesome sounding results. So yeah, before we even dive into like the bass box and the synth box, let's look at how to build one of these drum boxes. We're just going to drop in like a couple of these drum pads and then discuss how the effects and all of this stuff is set up. And then you're pretty much free to go off on your own and build this however you want. It's also worth pointing out, you know, you could drop in more knobs here if you wanted to. The only reason I've just done it this way is because I'm using a push 2, and even though you can view all 16 knobs on there, I just find it really convenient to have these effects for fast automation. So I'm just going to start a new MIDI track over here. I'm going to go to Instruments and drop in a blank drum rack. Great. So on C1 here, we want to drop in an instrument. We're going to use sampler, not simpler, sampler. Awesome. So we can drop in a ton of samples in here and have them play back in different ways. What we're going to do is go to Zone, And I've already got my sample folder open here. So I'm just going to go in. There's a bunch of ASD files here. Ignore those. Basically, what you want is drop in all of your samples, which should be WAV files. Drag and drop them in. Great. Now, with all of those selected, we're going to go to this Select tab up here. Right-click in the top and choose Distribute Ranges Equally. Now, this basically means that whenever this blue icon moves above one of these blue rows, it's going to select a different sample for us. But obviously, we don't want to come in here and use this to control it. We need this mapped to a macro knob. So the way to introduce some of those is to select your sampler device. We're going to press Ctrl-G to group it. And if we press this little button here, it opens up our macro knobs. Now we'll need to go back to the select page, right-click here, and go Map to Macro 1. So right now this says Sample Select. We're going to rename this to Kick Select. And we're also going to rename this pad to Kick, just so that it's really obvious what's going on and what we're controlling. Now, I like to put a couple of controls in here so that you can get as much control over the sound of this sample as possible before applying any effects. So if we go into the Pitch or Oscillator tab here, there's a Transpose option. So we're going to map that to Macro 2. We're also going to go to the Filter or Global tab and map Pan to Macro 3 and Volume to Macro 4. Finally, I like to have an envelope control built into this as well, just for quick and easy shaping. So we're going to come over here and map Attack to 5, Decay to 6, Sustain to 7, and Release to 8. Now these all have VE written in them, and you can just come in here and rename them and take out the VE if you want, just so that it's like a little bit neater and easier to use. And one other thing I might point out really quickly is that if I play this sample, I might just choose a different one that's more obvious. Great. So we can hear that sample's being triggered, but it's got no velocity. It doesn't matter how hard or how soft I hit this pad or my push, there's no velocity. And you can introduce that here with the volume over velocity control. Now be careful, because if you push this all the way, you can clip really easily. So yeah, I found setting this to around like 25% seemed to work really well. I didn't include this on my sample pack just because I wanted all the samples to be heard, and just I can mess around with the velocity of things later. But I thought it worth mentioning here. Great, so now that we got that set up, we're just going to hold Control and click and drag onto the next pad here. Rename this one to Snare. And we can just select all of these samples and hit Delete. I'm going to open up the Snare folder here. Just scroll down to the WAV files, select them and drag them in. Now, if we come in here, we still need to go to the Select tab and distribute ranges evenly. But you'll notice that the selector knob is still mapped for us. So we don't need to redo anything, except we might want to rename this to Snare Select. And then you can just repeat this for all of the drum sounds that you want. In my sample pack version, I included different things like toms, clangs, cymbals and claps and whatnot. And I also made 2 effects slots, which these are just like random sounds that aren't even percussive half the time. One thing I think is worth pointing out though, is that Tom 1 and Tom 2, they're actually the exact same. So these are an identical group of samples. It's just that Tom 2 is pitched down a few semitones. So coming back to the drum rack that we're building, I'm not going to go ahead and build the rest of these because you've already seen it, but we are going to build in some effects. So now that we got this set up, we can actually hide our sampler device. And what I like to do is drop in a channel EQ. So this means that while we're playing around with our song, find the sample that we want. Maybe that's got too much low end. We can just drop it or boost it. It's entirely up to you. It just gives you like really quick hands-on control without going like as crazy as an EQ8. So the next thing we want to do to include some effects is group this entire thing. And we're going to open up these macros at the front. And we can see that there's like a gap here in the middle. There's a little curved edge sort of signifying that these are all sort of one thing. And we want to apply these effects to all of this. So we're going to drop our effects in after it. And that means that the effects will sort of be affecting the entire drum rack. So the only effect I'm going to show how to build here is the low pass sweep filter that I included, just because I feel like every other effect is essentially built the exact same way. And this one's really easy to get your head around. So we're going to drop in an auto filter. And the thing about this is I wanted to make sure that when I twisted these knobs, it wasn't just cutting off the sound completely. I wanted it to actually sweep through so that we could get like more of a performance effect out of it. So we're going to select this auto filter and we're going to group it. And we'll open up the macro knobs here. Just to keep this neat and tidy, let's rename this to effects. So there's a couple of things that we want to do with this. We want to map frequency to macro 1. And this means that as we sweep through this, sweeping through our frequency, we also want to map resonance to macro 1. However, you'll notice that upon doing that, it boosts the resonance all the way to the top and drops it as we go down, which is the complete opposite effect of what we want. So if we select the little map icon up here, we can see that we're on macro 1, we have frequency and resonance, and we just want to flip these values the other way. Great. If that's too high for you, when it gets down this low, you can just reduce it. It's entirely up to you. It's kind of like setting keyframes when you're animating. For now, I'm just going to leave it all the way to the top. And finally, the other thing that I wanted to make sure with all of these effects is that none of them were turned on while they weren't activated. So we're actually going to right click the on switch and map this to macro 1 as well. But we can see as we drop this down, it kind of turns off halfway through. So we actually want the device on max value to be 1 notch lower. So we'll make this 126 and we can set this to 0. So now when we sweep through, the device is on because we're activating it. But as soon as it gets back to the top, it switches off. So we can exit this map function now. I'll rename this to low pass filter. And then we're going to right click that and map it to macro 1 all the way over here. And I just like to give these colors so that they're easily identifiable. So ultimately, your final effects rack should look like this for the drums. Which is really, really cool. And then the next step would be, to go in, find whatever effect you wanted. We're going to make sure that it's in the effects rack. So we can hide auto filter for now. Now we've got delay. And then you set up the delay exactly the way that you want. Map the dry wet control and the on off switch and then go from there. Pretty basic stuff. So that's essentially how to set up a drum rack. I'll just rename this drum for now. Let's have a look at these other two that I've set up here. Now that you have the general concept, I don't think that I need to build these from scratch. Essentially, right now we've got a bass box. It has all of the same effects and controls as the drum box over here, except on the drum box I included a drum bus, and on the bass box I included a chorus, which just gives it like a really wide sound. Now, if we open up our sampler device here, we can see that these are all just a bunch of bass samples. The velocity is not active, but you could change that anytime that you wanted to. But something to keep in mind is for the bass sample, I didn't want there to be chords playable. So we've just changed the voices here to ones that it can only play one voice at a time. It's worth noting too, in here you've got things like portamento and glide. So yeah, pretty fun stuff. Finally, if we go to the actual sample page, and we'll just pick the first sample in here. We can hear that our sample gets all the way to the end and it cuts off. Now, I didn't loop any of these bass samples just because I couldn't be bothered, to be honest. I don't find myself needing bass notes to hold out that long in a lot of the music that I make. But in the synth version, which is the exact same sort of setup, just with synth samples, we can hear that we can hold these notes out for as long as we want, and they loop fairly seamlessly. So if we compare the sort of different controls that we got set up here, and it can be useful to have the info view open while you're looking at this. We have like different sustain modes. So we've just got the modes being on, loop, and loop back and forth. So this one is just set to loop. Let's select the first sample just so that we're all on the same. So we can see this going through and it loops. Now this is a fairly simple sample to loop, but others might be a little bit more difficult. So like if we were to loop this a bit further down, you can actually change like a crossfade setting here. So it sort of fades in and out of the sample. So although it was painstaking, yeah, I basically went through each and every sample in here and looped every single one of them. And it took a little while, but we got there in the end. So again, you can set up these devices any way that you want. Right now, I'm just using samples, but you could definitely build this exact same thing and throw in a wavetable instrument or an analog instrument. In fact, if you go into wavetable, like a bunch of these kind of device racks that are already set up for you to behave in a specific way. The reason I've set these ones up like this is just so that we can get a little bit more of a Groovebox workflow. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and opened up another Ableton project here, just because I wanted to demonstrate one key feature, but just so that you can all hear this. We've got our RSKT drum box at the start. Nothing too crazy. Now what I did is I resampled that out really quickly and dropped it into a simpler device, and then we'll just solo this out. And what I'm going to do is just quickly grab all of these effects, group them, and turn them off. So that sounds like this. So yeah, pretty basic stuff. And then I went ahead and just threw on a bunch of different effects and played around with them to get different sounds out of it. So we'll turn it on and hear what that sounds like. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool sound. It's just a bunch of different effects. So we have a lot of compression, spectral resonator, some redux, corpus, an auto filter, just sort of find that little frequency that I really liked in there. We've got hybrid reverb, saturator, a pitch shifter, and some sidechain compression with an EQ8 after it. And yeah, that produced this. So yeah, still just sounds from the sample pack. Next up, we've also got this fills track. So that's from the sample pack as well. And just finding that pinging frequency there that I really like. And when you layer this up on top of the drums, it sounds really cool. Let's bring in the bass. sort that out. You can hear that this bass actually has a little bit of top end to it, and we can see I've boosted that frequency just here. And that's actually the Redux. If we turn it off, there's not much there. I thought it sounded really cool. And then that brings us on to the final track, which is really what I want to get into here. This one. Let's solo it out. And we'll turn off the sidechain compressor at the end. So let's have a quick look at what's going on here. If we hide our device rack, this thing here, we can see that, yeah, it's just the synth box. So just set up the exact same way that we just covered in this video. We have a synth sound, but if we go into this little icon here, we can add in more channels. So clicking on this, there's our basic synth sound set up the exact same way as before. But if we add in a new channel like I've done here, I've actually got a muted guitar string in here. So if I just solo this out and I'll turn off the reverb. Yeah, pretty basic stuff. So what I've done is added on a pretty lush reverb that lasts for a long time. And if we layer that up with the synth sound, which just sounds like this, by the way. So let's bring in the muted guitar. We get this nice little stab at the start. We can increase the attack on the synth sound. So we're mainly getting the guitar at the start and the synth sort of slowly comes in. Or we could leave it off and control the guitar muted sound with this guy. Obviously, we could also introduce like another set of macros. We can map this to macro 9, for example. And don't forget, you can go into map and like choose just like how much influence that's going to have when you push it up all the way so that you know you're not clipping and whatnot. And yeah, now we can sort of bring that in and out. So yeah, I'm just going to remove those for now and we'll unmap that, set it back to -4. And then yeah, finally, again, I just added in like a massive amount of reverb on that because I found that the lush tail of the reverb on this kind of blended in with the synth and made like a really cool sound. So I'm going to press it back on and bring it all in. So yeah, I hope that by this point it's sort of becoming evident of what I'm trying to get across here. It's that, you know, you can build these things and still come back in later and have an enormous flexible amount of sound design options available to you. I'm just finding the key purpose of these for me at the moment is like this whole section, this whole little track here, probably took me less than 5 minutes to make. Like, I threw it together so fast without really stopping to think about what samples I wanted to use, what effects I wanted to use, because these are just effects and samples that I use commonly. So loading in a template and just sort of fleshing out something like this. Now I could come in and, add in some more tracks and move things around and whatnot, play the whole thing into the arrangement view. Bam, there's my arranger done. And I'm sort of free to go back in and do additional sound design stuff there. It's worth noting as well, like, don't be afraid to look at a lot of the presets. I know, for example, Wavetable has a bunch of presets that are set up in very similar ways to this. One that sticks out in my mind is if we go to Synth Rhythmic and we grab Distant Memories here. Let's load this in and solo it out. Beautiful sounding rack. But we can come in here and we can open this up, and yeah, we can see that, okay, they've got a wavetable in here. They've got some samples in here of bowed strings with a bunch of different effects applied to them. We've got a cymbal loop, which seems to be playing in reverse, and another wavetable synth. So yeah, this thing's like insane for what it can do, and it's a little bit CPU intensive, but not too much because it's all made with stock devices and whatnot. And the beauty of it is, they've gone ahead and mapped a lot of the controls that you're probably going to want to use over here with these like really basic controls. And then of course we can just hide all of that, set up your favorites, and then like add in a new preset like they've done here. So every time sort of toggle this on, it's going to sound different. Anyways, I hope that this has all been super helpful to you guys. I know that some seasoned Ableton vets will probably not find this very informative. But yeah, I hope that it's helped somebody out there, because I have a lot of fun with this sort of stuff, and I hope that you do too. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, check me out on Patreon, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.